Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today we're diving headfirst into one of the most critical topics in the prepping world, the mistakes that could end up getting you killed if you choose to bug in during a major crisis. Now, when you hear bugging in, most people imagine barricading themselves at home, safe and sound with a comfy chair, a pile of canned food, and maybe some Netflix if the power's still on. But reality has a way of shaking up that picture in ways we can't predict. One overlooked mistake, and everything you planned for can unravel faster than you might believe. We're going to talk about the most dangerous pitfalls that preppers, from beginners to veterans, tend to fall into when they decide to hunker down. But before we go any further, I want you to imagine you're all set with your supplies. Maybe you've got some water stored away and then, without warning, something goes wrong. Maybe you forgot to patch a weak spot in your home security, or you didn't realize how easily your neighbors could hear your generator running. Maybe you never practiced a single drill for what to do if somebody breaks in. These missteps can lead to a chain reaction that takes your safe haven from secure fortress to absolute death trap in a blink. I'm going to show you how to avoid those disasters, because it's not just about survival. It's about making sure you thrive when the world outside has lost its mind. So if that grabs your attention, and I hope it does, be sure to stick with me to the very end. And if you haven't already, this is the time to subscribe to the channel, drop a like, and share this video with others who need to hear it. Trust me, these are the kinds of insights that can literally save lives. Let's jump right in. The first big mistake is the one people rarely anticipate: freezing up in the face of danger. We often think that if we gather enough supplies, gear, or knowledge, we'll be ready for whatever comes our way. But what happens when your front door is being kicked in at 2 a.m? In that split second, if you hesitate, if you stop to weigh every possibility instead of acting, you might not get a second chance. Survival is about decisions, and sometimes you have to make them faster than you can process. Picture this scenario. Your power's been out for days, your neighbors have started acting strangely, and you suddenly hear footsteps outside your window at midnight. You check your phone, battery's almost gone, and your heart is pounding. Instead of calmly recalling your plan, you're paralyzed. You can't decide whether to turn on the flashlight or keep the lights off. Do you grab your weapon, or do you see if it's just a stray animal? That moment of indecision can be your downfall, because you're effectively handing over the advantage to whoever is out there. Freezing up isn't limited to home invasions. Imagine there's a fire in your kitchen because you tried cooking in a makeshift manner after the gas line went down. The stove's on fire, flames are creeping up the wall, and all your mind can do is say, "This isn't happening, I'm not prepared for this." The seconds tick by, and soon it's too late to salvage your home, or maybe even yourself. The key is to train yourself now. Run drills. Practice responding to different types of threats. A break-in, a sudden fire, a medical emergency. These drills might feel silly when life is normal, but when stress is high, muscle memory can be your best ally. People who freeze are typically those who haven't rehearsed scenarios in their mind or in real life. The more you expose yourself to stressful simulations, the more likely you'll be able to move quickly and decisively when it truly matters. In a bug-in scenario, things can escalate faster than you'd believe. Maybe it's a natural disaster, maybe it's social unrest. Regardless, hesitation kills. So train yourself to act. Drill your family, have a plan for each likely emergency, and practice it until it's second nature. That way, when the real thing happens, you're ready to move. No freezing, no panic, just action. Next up is failing to maintain good old OPSEC, operational security. This might sound like a fancy military term, but it boils down to something pretty simple. If people know what you have, they may come to take it. The greatest threat in a crisis often isn't just the crisis itself. It's the people who find themselves unprepared and turn desperate overnight. Neighbors you used to chat with over the fence might come knocking when they hear you've still got running water or the smell of hot food drifting from your vents. OPSEC is about being invisible in the crowd. That means not posting on social media about your giant stockpile of canned goods or bragging to your friend that you've got a generator. Some folks take pride in being preppers and love to show off their gear, which is understandable. It's a big part of their lifestyle. But if you publicly display it, guess who remembers that information when their pantry's empty? The same people you showed it to. Your daily habits can give you away too. If the lights in your home stay on long after everyone else's are out, you're basically waving a neon sign that says, "Hey, I have power when nobody else does." The same goes for cooking smells. If you're frying up bacon when the whole block is starving, that scent will travel. Also, the noise of your generator is a dead giveaway that you've got energy reserves. Sometimes you can't avoid running a generator because you need electricity for medical equipment or to keep critical appliances working. But try to muffle the sound, place it in a shed with ventilation, and do everything you can to make it less noticeable. OPSEC includes how you deal with trash as well. If you're discarding food wrappers, cans, or packaging, don't let it pile up in front of your house. Burn it safely or conceal it so no one knows what you're eating. In short, OPSEC is about blending in, especially when times get tough. The more invisible you can be, the safer you'll remain from those who might use violence or intimidation to take what you've worked hard to store. This one goes hand in hand with OPSEC, but it deserves its own spotlight. Broadcasting your preparedness through direct communication. You might be proud of how ready you are. Maybe you spent years researching the best water filters, or you've got a basement stocked with freeze-dried meals. It's only natural to feel a little proud and want to share your knowledge. The problem is, every time you mention your well-stocked pantry or your extensive medical kit, you run the risk of painting a target on your back. Think about how gossip spreads in a neighborhood. You might tell one friend you trust, who tells another friend they trust, and eventually the rumor goes around that you're the local doomsday prepper. In normal times, people might just think you're eccentric or overprepared. But in a genuine crisis, that rumor transforms you into a resource that people remember. You never know who's listening either. A casual mention in a grocery store line or a social media post that doesn't even name you specifically can still reach ears that might come knocking. One day everything's peachy, and you're just excitedly telling someone about the new solar panels you installed. The next week the grid goes down, and that person shows up at your doorstep, begging, or worse, demanding, to share the wealth. It's not about being unkind, it's about survival. If you broadcast that you're flush with supplies when others are running on empty, you put yourself and your family at serious risk. Desperate people do desperate things, and the surest way to become a target is to let them know you've got what they need. Keep your mouth shut, keep your supplies under wraps, and resist that temptation to brag. There's a common belief that as long as you're inside your house, you're protected from whatever chaos is happening outside. Unfortunately, that's often far from the truth. Standard homes are built for comfort and aesthetics, not necessarily for security against extreme threats. Maybe you have a nice, sturdy front door, but how about the back door? Are the window locks actually robust, or are they just the standard latches that can be pried open with a decent screwdriver? The idea of hardening your home isn't to turn it into an impenetrable fortress, because that can sometimes attract attention, oddly enough, but it's to shore up weaknesses without screaming to the world, "I have something worth protecting." Reinforced doors, longer screws in the strike plates, security film on windows that prevent them from being easily shattered. These are the kinds of upgrades you can do quietly, and they make a huge difference if someone tries to break in. You might also think about installing motion detector lights, cameras, or even low-tech alarm systems like jingle bells on doors and windows. It's incredible how a simple noise deterrent can spook an intruder. People snooping around typically want to remain unseen and unheard. If you can't afford high-end systems, get creative. Fishing line tied to an empty can, that kind of thing. Sometimes the old-fashioned methods work just as well, if not better. But don't just look at your doors and windows. Think about your walls, your attic, your basement. Is there a crawl space where someone can sneak in? Check your entire perimeter. Look for vantage points where outsiders could see what's inside or where you store certain items. It might seem paranoid, but a crisis situation is exactly when you'll wish you had that extra layer of caution. The bottom line is, don't assume you're secure just because you have 4 walls. Test them, reinforce them, and make them as unappealing to intruders as possible. When you decide to bug in, it's tempting to think, "I'm staying no matter what. This is the plan and I'm sticking to it." That mentality can get you killed if something happens that forces you to leave your safe haven. Your home could become compromised by fire, flood, a mob of looters, or even just structural damage after an earthquake. If you haven't planned for the possibility that you might need to evacuate, you're gambling with your life. The best approach is to have a go bag ready, packed with essentials that will help you survive on the move. Think of items like clothing, basic first aid, water filtration, some food, and crucial documents. Keep it somewhere easily accessible, so if you need to bolt in a hurry, You're not scrabbling around in the dark, trying to remember which closet you stashed your bug-out gear in. You should also have a few different routes mapped out. Don't rely on just the main highway. If it's jammed, you need alternate paths. Maybe those side roads, those service roads, or even footpaths can be your escape. If you can, stash some supplies at a secondary location. A trusted friend's house, a storage locker, or maybe a piece of land out of town if that's an option. The point is, staying put is great until it isn't. Things can escalate quickly and unpredictably. If you have no plan B, you'll be caught off guard trying to figure it out under immense stress. That's when people make fatal mistakes, so have your backup plan and rehearse it just like you rehearse your home defense. If the day comes that you need to bail, you'll be confident in exactly what to do, and you won't waste valuable time second-guessing yourself. You might be prepared for looters and have your house locked down like Fort Knox, but what about the silent destroyer known as fire? One spark in the wrong place and your carefully stocked fortress could go up in flames. This is particularly true when the power's out and you're relying on candles, gas stoves, or other improvised lighting and cooking methods. It's easy to knock over a candle when you're fumbling around in the dark, or let a small grease fire get out of control. Fire extinguishers are your best friend in this scenario. Plural, as in multiple extinguishers spread throughout your home. One by the kitchen, one near your sleeping area, another maybe by your generator if you have one. You want to be able to grab an extinguisher within seconds, because that's all it takes for a small flame to become unmanageable. You also want to consider your home's ventilation. If you're using a wood stove or a portable gas heater, make sure it's well ventilated and check it often. Another aspect people forget is having clear escape routes. If you've boarded up windows and doors to keep intruders out, how quickly can you unboard them if you need to flee a fire? It's a balancing act. You want security, but you also need to make sure you and your family can evacuate if there's a blaze. There's also a mental component to fire safety. Never get complacent. A small candle might seem harmless, but all it takes is an accidental elbow or a gust of wind from an open window. In a crisis, you might be running on less sleep, more stress, and 1,000 other worries. That's exactly when mistakes happen. So keep your home's flammable materials to a minimum, store fuels responsibly, and treat every flame with respect. People focus on storing drinking water, and that's great because dehydration is definitely a killer. But what about cleaning your hands, washing dishes, or even doing laundry in a long-term scenario? If you forget to plan for non-drinking water needs, you're setting yourself up for unsanitary conditions that can lead to sickness faster than you can say, "I have diarrhea." If your main water source is a bunch of store-bought water jugs or barrels, that might be enough for drinking for a short period, but once you start washing clothes or dishes, those gallons vanish quickly. That's when improvised solutions come in. Maybe you collect rainwater in barrels, maybe you have a nearby pond or creek that you can filter water from. Or maybe you capture condensation in the morning with tarps. All these methods can help you manage day-to-day hygiene requirements. Sanitation is huge because once you let your living conditions become filthy, disease can spread like wildfire. Think about how you'll wash up after going to the bathroom, how you'll sanitize your cooking surfaces and utensils, and how you'll keep your body and clothes clean enough to avoid rashes and infections. Sure, you might be able to go a couple of days without a proper shower, but in a long-term crisis, that's not sustainable. Also, consider what happens if your main water supply gets contaminated. Maybe a dead animal ends up in your well, or chemicals leak into the local water table. You need a reliable backup, and you need to test and rotate that water regularly. Some people store bleach or purification tablets. Others invest in high-quality filters. Whatever you choose, just don't overlook the tremendous amount of water you use for daily tasks. Drinking it is only one piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about something that's not exactly glamorous, but will become a serious issue if you ignore it. Sanitation and waste management. When the toilets stop flushing and the garbage service isn't running, you quickly realize how much waste a household produces, both human and otherwise. Piling up trash in the backyard isn't just an eyesore, it's a health hazard. Rodents, insects, and bacteria will flourish. That can lead to a whole host of diseases that nobody wants. Then there's the issue of human waste. In a short-term outage, maybe you can still flush once in a while by pouring water into the bowl. But if the water supply is completely gone, or the sewers are backed up, that's no longer an option. Composting toilets, bucket toilets with sawdust, or even homemade outhouse setups might be a solution, but only if you've planned for them. You need the supplies, heavy-duty trash bags, sawdust, lime, or anything else you plan to use to manage the odor and germs. You also need to figure out where you'll dispose of those bags. Simply stashing them in a corner of your property is a recipe for disaster if the crisis lasts longer than expected. Hand washing is another huge aspect of sanitation. In a crisis, people often skimp on basic hygiene, which is exactly when germs start spreading. If you have limited water, maybe set up a small hand washing station with a spigot and a bucket to catch runoff, so you can reuse or purify that water later. Also, keep plenty of soap, disinfectants, and bleach on hand. Once again, if you overlook sanitation, you'll quickly find that disease is just as dangerous as any other threat out there. Air might seem like something you don't really have to worry about. After all, it's everywhere, right? But in a crisis, especially in colder climates, people often seal up their homes to maintain warmth or keep out potential intruders. They might run a generator indoors or use kerosene heaters without proper ventilation. That's when the invisible killer known as carbon monoxide creeps in. Carbon monoxide poisoning is lethal and can strike without warning because you can't see it, smell it, or taste it. All you might notice is a headache, dizziness, or weakness, symptoms that can easily be mistaken for dehydration or just being tired. If you don't catch it in time, you can pass out and never wake up. So, if you're using any fuel-burning device, make sure the area is ventilated and get battery-powered CO detectors. They might be one of the best investments you'll ever make. Beyond CO, let's talk about mold and stale air. If you're cooped up for weeks or months, moisture can build up, especially if you're cooking and drying clothes indoors. Mold spores can cause serious respiratory issues, which you definitely don't want when medical help might be limited. Periodically, vent your home, crack a window, circulate air with a fan, or use moisture absorbers if you can. It's a balancing act because you don't want to draw attention from outside, but you also can't let your living space become a giant petri dish. Always remember, air quality is something that slips under the radar in survival planning, but it can swiftly become a major hazard if you're not paying attention. Keep an eye on your ventilation, watch your heat sources, and install those detectors. It could literally save your life. Having a single water source is a bit like gambling everything on one bet. Maybe you've got a well and you think that'll be fine. But what if the pump breaks or the water gets contaminated? Or maybe you've got rain barrels and are counting on the next storm to refill them. What if there's a drought? In a long-term crisis, water becomes the most precious commodity. You need it for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and hygiene. Relying on just one source is a gamble that could cost you dearly. Think about having at least 2 or 3 different options. Maybe a combination of stored water, a well, and the ability to collect rain or purify natural sources like a nearby creek. You also need multiple methods of purification. Boiling is great if you have the fuel. Chemical treatments work if you have enough tablets or bleach. Filters are convenient, but they can clog or wear out. And that fancy high-end filter you bought online might break if you don't know how to maintain it properly. So diversify. Maybe keep a simple pump filter as a backup, have some purification tablets, and know how to build a DIY filter with charcoal and sand if it comes down to it. The worst feeling in the world is realizing that your single water source is gone or compromised when you still have weeks or months to endure. Make sure you never let that happen by planning for redundancies. Water is life, so treat it with the respect it deserves in your survival plan. It's easy to feel a sense of security when you see shelves packed with canned goods and buckets of freeze-dried meals, but a pile of supplies isn't a plan. Have you considered how many calories you and your family need per day? How will you handle dietary restrictions, allergies, or simple food boredom that might lead to people not eating enough? What's your plan for rotating stock so nothing expires? These questions matter because if you're just throwing food into your basement without a strategy, you could end up with a lot of wasted resources. Proper rotation ensures you use the oldest items first. Label everything with dates, and keep a log so you know exactly what you have and when it's likely to expire. Then there's the question of nutritional balance. Living off rice and beans alone might keep you alive for a while, but you could end up malnourished or severely lacking in vitamins. That's why it's a good idea to include canned vegetables, fruits, meats, and even some comfort foods. Morale can be just as important as nutrition, especially in a prolonged crisis. You'll also want to think about storage conditions. Keep your food in a cool, dark, dry place to extend shelf life. Make sure it's rodent-proof or insect-proof, because a single infestation can wipe out your stock. And don't forget about the methods you'll use to cook and prepare these foods if the power is out. Having buckets of flour and no way to bake bread isn't going to help much. So don't just stack cans and call it a day. Plan it out. Know how long your supplies will realistically last, how you'll cook them, and how you'll replenish them if the crisis outlasts your initial stockpile. Even if you've carefully planned how much food you need, poor storage can undermine all that effort. Leaving bags of rice in a damp garage or storing cans where the temperature fluctuates widely is a recipe for spoilage. You might come back to find mold, rusted cans, or pests that have turned your food storage into their personal buffet. One best practice is to use Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers for dry goods like rice, beans, and grains. Then place those bags in food-grade buckets that keep out light and pests. For canned goods, rotate them based on the first-in, first-out principle. Keep them in a place that stays relatively cool and dry. If possible, store them on shelves rather than the floor to avoid moisture issues and make it easier to spot leaks or problems. Pay attention to expiration dates, but also use common sense. Many canned foods remain edible past their printed best by date, though the taste or texture might degrade. Periodically check your stock for signs of swelling, rust, or broken seals. If something seems off, discard it rather than risk food poisoning in a survival scenario. Another angle is preventing cross-contamination. If you store cleaning chemicals in the same area as your food, a leak or a spill could ruin your entire supply. Keep chemicals separate and sealed properly. Think about your containers too. Make sure they're sealed tight and not prone to cracking or warping over time. In short, there's no point in stockpiling food if it's not going to be safe or fresh when you need it. Invest the time and resources to store it right. It's the difference between having a life-saving food supply or a massive pile of ruined goods. The final mistake is arguably the biggest failing to adapt. Survival is never a static situation. You can have the best laid plans, the perfect gear, and an incredible stockpile. But if you can't pivot when things change, you're setting yourself up for disaster. Maybe you planned for a 2-week power outage, but it turns into months. Maybe you counted on your neighbors sticking together, but instead they turn on each other, or they migrate away. Conditions can shift on the ground so fast that if you're not ready to adapt, you'll be caught off guard. Adaptation means being mentally flexible, staying informed if possible, and never getting complacent. It means reevaluating your resources, your security, and your strategies on a continual basis. If you're dealing with a long-term event, what worked in the first few days might not work in week 4 or month 2. The best way to cultivate adaptability is through constant learning and practice. Try new methods of cooking, new ways to collect water, new defensive tactics. Don't just rely on the first system you set up. Challenge it, test it, and improve upon it. Seek out real-world examples, read survival stories, talk to other preppers about their experiences. The more you expose yourself to different scenarios, the more flexible your mindset will become. In the end, survival is less about having the biggest stockpile and more about having the mindset to roll with the punches. Be ready to switch gears, leave if you have to, share resources strategically if it builds alliances, and never assume that what you planned is exactly what will happen. That's the secret to making it through when the world turns upside down. We've covered a lot of ground here, from freezing up under pressure to forgetting that sanitation matters just as much as food and water. Now, you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed thinking about all the different ways a bug-in scenario can go wrong. But remember this: being aware of these pitfalls puts you miles ahead of most people. You now have the advantage of knowledge, and knowledge when put into action can mean the difference between life and death. Take each of these mistakes to heart and start addressing them in your own prepping plan. Don't panic, don't get discouraged, and definitely don't ignore the insights we've talked about today. The best time to refine your bug-in strategy is right now, while life is still relatively normal. Once the crisis hits, it's too late to start scrambling around, patching holes in your plan. I encourage you to do a thorough audit of your current setup. Walk around your house and see how secure it really is. Check your stockpile for rotation and cleanliness. Test how quickly you can respond to a simulated emergency. And if you find weaknesses, and we all have them, take steps to fix them ASAP. If you found value in this, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we'll be diving into more ways to keep you and your loved ones safe when disaster strikes. Remember, it's not just about surviving, it's about doing it smartly. Stay prepared, stay vigilant, and we'll catch you next time. Until then, keep learning, keep practicing, and keep that flexible mindset. You've got this.